Good morning, everyone. My name is Moel Sumidai, and I'm the Chief Editor at the Clinical Trial Vanguard. I have the pleasure here this morning with Dr. Christina Brennan, who is the Senior Vice President of the Clinical Research at Northwell. And we're here at the Veeva R&D and Quality Summit here in Boston. Welcome, Christina.
Hello, good morning, and thank you, Mo, for having me today. It's a pleasure to be back. I was here last year at this summit, and I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Such a pleasure. So, my first question to you is, you've run trials at one of the largest health systems in the country. And from your vantage point, what would you say are the most persistent operational bottlenecks that you're facing and sites face today? And which of those do you think are the most solvable in the near term?
So I would say this is nothing new to sites or sponsors and CROs is recruitment challenges. If recruitment was not a challenge, the trials would finish on time. Sponsors often have to double their timelines, and it costs them a lot more money, and recruitment can be a challenge. Although the statistics say that 80% of the patients that you will recruit are known to your institution, but yet sites continue to have a challenge to find those patients, although we know eventually that's where they will come from. So I think that is a challenge that sites have to look at, and through the use of technology, and I know we're talking at Veeva Summit today, which is a technology-based company, and I think it's important that we continue to use technology as a tool to help with recruitment, and also for sites to work closely with sponsors when helping to develop protocols and challenges that they may have with finding the eligible patients.
Mm-hmm. And where do you think that's heading from a technology standpoint? I mean, we're seeing a lot of work with EHR, ability to pre-qualify patients and reach out to them through EHR. What other areas do you see the recruitment changing, especially in larger medical research institutions like Northwell?
So I think we really have to tap into the electronic medical records. So traditionally, when you talk about, finding eligible patients, so during feasibility, when you're really looking at just aggregate data, just to see, do you have that patient population? But when it comes to actually finding the patients, it has to go beyond what we're using today, is more just diagnosis codes. We need the help of technology and AI friendly to really look at natural language processing so we can get down to the notes in the chart, finding keywords, really narrowing in on the eligibility, because protocols are pretty complex and we need to find the inclusion-exclusion criteria, and it has to go beyond the diagnosis codes.
Mm-hmm. And it's quite, there are a lot of nuances in recruitment and enrollment. For example, some studies require a physician's interpretation of the patient's overall health care and the picture of the patient. Do you see AI helping with this?
I do. It's not just your PI. Even if we look at the clinical space today, we have to think of research as the same as a care option. And so in clinical care, we have a multidisciplinary approach. So we use many other therapeutic areas to have a team meeting to figure out, is this the right patient for, X procedure or X diagnosis? So I think in research, it should also be multidisciplinary approach to really find if these are the right suitable patients. So it can go beyond the PI and really using other clinicians as well.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And AI can help to facilitate that process so that you're having the right patients presented in front of the PI.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And in front of the staff.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And AI is a tool that still many are hesitant to use just because it's still so new, but it can be just that, a tool.
And so many sponsors still design, surprisingly, protocols and systems with minimal site input. I see this all the time running sites. And so if you could advise sponsors on one operational change that would make site operations easier tomorrow, make protocol design easier tomorrow, what would that be?
I know we've talked about for a long time sponsors utilizing sites for the design of the protocol, and yet, they shy away. And a lot of that is around the science written of the protocol. But I think if you use sites to look at the schedule of assessments, because that always is a challenge, you look at that large, table that's on the protocol. And one thing I like to ask sponsors to do to work with us is to run a mock patient through that schedule of assessment. What does it really look like for the site to have to run an enrollment day, screening day, and then follow-up visits? Is it really feasible that the patient will be there for X hours during the day? So I think utilizing sites before that schedule of assessments is finalized to see how feasible it is to run through that at a site. And and one other thing that I often think about, and I feel we miss it today, the investigator meetings of way back that used to occur, and they're way different today. Many times they're used in place of SIVs, but the former investigator meetings where PIs really had an input in the protocol, it was a very engaged meeting, and most of the times, by the time the meeting was ending, there was already a protocol amendment because now they had the key stakeholders at the table. So these meetings are not occurring anymore, whether that was because of our COVID pandemic, but I think they need to get back because it was a really valuable meeting.
And it's fascinating because oftentimes, like when I run through studies, I oftentimes see that the protocol is not designed in a way that even matches standard of care. It's very scientifically focused, right? But doesn't make sense from a standard of care focus. So
Right.
a lot of investigators go in using their standard of care approaches and methodologies and thinking, well, that's counterintuitive, and here we are with a protocol deviation, right?
Yes. That's very challenging because the more that you go outside of standard of care, the more that the physicians will be non-compliant. Which physicians need to really take a look at the protocol during feasibility, site qualification. Is this something that they're really going to be able to comply with? Because it really puts the coordinators in such a predicament when they know it's going outside of the protocol requirements because a physician said, well, this is my standard of care. But the protocol is what you have to follow if you want to be a part of that trial.
So you mentioned the pandemic sort of shifting away from what sponsors used to do when it came to these investigator meetings and engaging the sites. What other potential reasons do you think are happening? Because regulations and regulators are encouraging patient engagement, site engagement in protocol design. What happened?
I think that we started to go down the path of decentralized trials. And, many sponsors say, oh, is that the way we're going to go? Now we're going back a few years ago. But it really wasn't something that stuck. Many times sponsors would say, well, that sounds great, but not with my trial. So I think we really have to decide as an industry, are we moving in that direction, or will segments of your protocol be allowed to be decentralized? What will work? And when we say patient-centric, why can't we say site-centric? What will work for the site? Because at the end of the day, they're the ones who are, running the protocol at their site.
So Dr. Brennan, you engage study coordinators, you teach new students in clinical research with your involvement with ACRP, for example. So what themes do you hear from students and from coordinators that reveal how their role is changing, and what should the industry take seriously when it comes to hearing from those folks on the ground?
So we get a mix of coordinators at Northwell, which I think is common in a lot of sites. Some who use research as a stepping stone to higher education, which is fine, and some who make research a career, which we of course love because then we're really going to invest in them. So we're challenged at a site for training the coordinators who are using it as a stepping stone, because it takes quite a long time to get a coordinator trained to the level that you need them to be, versus those in the career. But I think that sponsors don't take coordinators seriously enough when they provide valuable input into what the day of a coordinator looks like. You know, we're training them. Many of them are often not clinical background, so we're training them how to read the protocol, how to keep PIs in compliance, how to get patients to return for follow-up visits, what are the tips and tricks, how to recruit patients, where to find recruited patients. So think of all of that, but yet we don't value, and sponsors don't value the coordinator's input, more of what does my day in the life of a coordinator look like, and how can I help this trial and sponsor succeed?
Mm-hmm. And so, in my experience, I used to be a study coordinator way back in the days, and right now, a lot of study coordinators are burning out, right? I wouldn't say right now, that's always been the case, but especially nowadays because there are so many technology platforms. And while they do reshape workflows, it adds, adding more platforms sort of creates more burden for the study coordinators than it removes sometimes. And even with a single sign-on, for example, you still have 20 different platforms that you have to log into. So from your perspectives, how should sites decide which technologies actually reduce the burden versus which ones create new layers of work?
So I think it's trial specific because, it depends when a sponsor comes to you with their trial and utilizing their platforms, or do you have an opportunity to use your platforms? When it comes to e-regulatory and you already have a solution at your site, why can't the site continue to use that solution rather than what's brought forward to them? So I think it's important to look at what technology does the site have versus what is mandated in the protocol. So I think that's important. And then you have to look at, sponsors have to look at who they're working with at a site. It's sort of bridging the gap of the generations. So it's the first time in history that we still could work with 5 different generations. People are still working in their 70s and early 80s and living longer versus people who were in their 20s right out of college. So some who grew up with technology and some who are still resistant to technology. So I think that is important to look at and see what the solutions could be to help those that are not as tech savvy.
And so study coordinators often juggle regulatory compliance, patient recruitment, patient care, and also sponsor demands on top of that. What operational practices have you seen either at Northwell or elsewhere that protect staff from burnout while maintaining study quality?
So I think sites need to look at workload acuity, because when you see how many trials a coordinator is holding, and as you just mentioned, are they doing the study startup? Are they handling the regulatory, which requires a lot? Even if a study is not as robust in enrollment, you still have those annual reviews. You still have maintaining all the regulatory documents. How many trials are they also holding? A workload acuity tool is so important because it just doesn't recognize a trial that is enrolling, but what about one that's in follow-up for years that you still have to maintain? And what is the complexity of the trials they're holding? Does one coordinator only have 1 or 2 trials versus someone else who has 4 or 5? And believe it or not, these workload acuity tools look at the screening involved in each trial. Is this a registry, or does this require a coordinator to go through the electronic medical record to find patients? Does this trial does the coordinator get handed the patients from a referral from a physician, or are they finding the patients themselves and going to the physician? All of these need to be looked at in a workload acuity tool, because it really is the operational manager or director's responsibility to handle the workload balance and to be fair across the board for the coordinators.
Mm-hmm. And so if you imagine a site of the future, what would an ideal sponsor-site relationship and partnership look like from workflows, from communication standpoints, and shared accountability? And what recommendations would you give to sponsors regarding that type of a relationship and the site of the future?
So I think you sort of just summarize what I always think of. Communication is key, but beyond communication is who do we communicate to? Oftentimes challenges from sites is the turnover from CROs and sponsors, and we don't know who our point person is. And there's nothing worse than being stressed when you're enrolling a patient, an investigator is pressuring you, you have questions about the protocol, and who does the site turn to? Is there a central person? Is there that 1-800 number, dating myself now, who even says 1-800 numbers, but who is that person that sites can turn to? So communication is key. If you develop a partnership and a relationship with a sponsor and the site, it goes a long way for success. That's basic. So even in the future, the communication and partnerships are going to be key.
Mm-hmm. And so this is fascinating because I wish there was also a 1-800 number that I can call when the CRAs are there. They never pick up the phone. And it's the worst when the patient is on the table, right? Mm-hmm. And you have an urgent question. Mm-hmm. And there are so many things that I imagined. Like, for example, when you look at ICH E6R3, for instance, mm-hmm. and they talk about accountability using systems and data transfers, like immediate access to data. Do you see these types of systems being developed to help with that? Like, for example, an agent that can answer the questions about the protocol, like a chat agent, for instance?
Well, I think we have to be cautious. Again, through the use of AI, I think can be useful and can be quite the tool, but we just have to make sure it doesn't replace a human, and even an agent, to make sure, is that really the person who knows the protocol well? Because it is key that we don't make a mistake mm-hmm. when relying on someone else. The site has to be accountable for knowing the protocol, even in those stressful moments, but we have to make sure we have the right person to really answer those questions, mm-hmm. because at the end of the day, we have a patient on the other end who we are enrolling. And if we keep thinking about clinical research is clinical care, then I think we'll have a different lens with that.
Mm-hmm. So we definitely still need human oversight at this point with these agents.
Yes.
Yeah, well, such a pleasure, Dr. Christina Brennan.
Thank you.
From VP of Clinical Research at Northwell. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.